What is the scariest story you know to be completely true? My cousin picked up a hitchhiker about 20 years ago. Nice enough guy. Cousin was hungry, so stopped at McDonald's, grabbed the hitchhiker some breakfast, too. Dropped him off where the guy had said he was headed. No big deal. Next morning, my cousin's watching the morning news and sees that hitchhiker's face. Dude was a serial killer and had killed someone that picked him up. Cousin calls the cops and they have him come in. Turns out the hitcher had killed the very next person after my cousin that had given him a ride. He'd killed a few people that had given him rides. That was his M.O. They asked the hitcher why he didn't kill my cousin. He said, I'd planned to, but he was a really nice young man. He bought me breakfast. I couldn't kill someone that bought me breakfast. My dad got into a car crash head-on with a convertible with a young couple in it, and the top part of the convertible window decapitated them instantly. He ended up falling into something red, Barry's blood. And when the cops and medics showed up, they were freaking out and telling him to lay down. He was actually fine. Witnessing that screwed him up, though. This reminds me of a story. One day I'm out in my front yard cleaning my boat. My neighbor Bob comes over to chat, and I take a break to drink a beer with him. About that time, another neighbor, Mark, strolled on by, and we invited him to have a beer, too. So we're sitting there on my boat drinking beer, and we're catching up, asking how everyone's kids are doing, etc. Mark says, "Oh, well, my boy's doing all right. The therapy is going well." Bob and I look at each other. Turns out neither of us knew he was in therapy. So I say, "Glad to hear he's doing better? What's he in therapy for?" Mark replies, "Oh, right, I never told you. We ended up being right behind an accident a few weeks ago, and we were the first on scene. Well, my boy and I get out and try to help, but unfortunately, the first thing my son found was the head of a little girl. She got decapitated on impact." We replied with shock and consolation. But then Mark said, "Yeah, we hope he'll start talking again soon. I really miss hearing his voice." I moved away a few months later. Never did find out if Mark's son started talking again. My son and I were driving behind a semi-truck with the lane next to us being designated for an Ironman race. A woman lost control of her bike, and she fell under the trailer of the truck. We watched in horror as her body was mangled by the tires. I ran out and was the first one to approach her. Blood was pouring out of her helmet. She was still wet from the swim portion of the race. I couldn't find a pulse. I screamed to a guy who was filming the damn thing to call 911. There were many doctors and nurses who tried to revive her. I swear I felt her soul left her body. She died right there. I still have PTSD from that day. My son seems okay. We both had therapy over that experience. Responded to a 911 call of a frantic neighbor with a girl that reported her mom was severely injured. Get on scene and find out the ex-boyfriend knocked on the door at Oro 300. The young girl recognized him and let him in. He said, "Thanks. Where's your mommy?" She pointed to her bedroom, and he proceeded to stab her multiple times in the face and chest. He then told the daughter, "Sorry," and slit his own throat. The daughter then ran around the neighborhood knocking on doors until a neighbor answered and called 911. The amount of blood was insane. My family and I are staying in a rental house for a few months because my dad was shit with money. This particular house was owned by a fairly wealthy friend of his who was going through a divorce because his wife had developed a long and nasty drug problem. So, we're staying there pretty cheap. One night near Christmas, I groggily wake up and see a woman wearing white going through drawers on the other side of the room. I must have made a sound because she turned and rushed over to me and gently said, "Shh, go back to sleep, little boy." Weirdly, I did. She looked like Liza Minnelli, if that's at all relevant. Next morning, I wake up to my parents acting weird, and I hear one of them make a comment like, "I can't tell what's gone and what's not." For some reason, I didn't connect the dots until I was older and never told them what I saw. I thought it was a dream. So, yeah, the former crackhead owner of our rental house broke in, probably had a key, and I saw her but didn't do or say shit. I was probably 9 or so. Worked with kids in foster care. A 17-year-old girl says she's got a secret to tell her CASA. Now we got a rape SWAT team for this shit, 'cause 17-year-old girls in foster system 910, it is rape. Well, she sits down and tells how her family was cartel and her cousins were enforcers. One day when she was like 8, her cousins pick her up and take her out to the desert where they have a 5-year-old boy. They make her choke him to death. I guess he was the kid of a family that owed them money, usually for getting smuggled over. Needless to say, we didn't have a game plan for that shit. The police basically said, "Ain't no body, no crime," since we had no actual details to identify on, and the cousins she could name were dead, not in the country, or already in prison. Poor kid confessed she was forced to murder a child with her bare hands, and the result was nothing. No justice for her, for the kid, for the family. Just guess shit happens. Year later, she was 18, and out of the system to face a world she knows to be wildly different than how we all claim it to be, and work. My ex-brother-in-law is John Strutz. He's my ex-husband's little brother. He lived with us from 1998 to 2004-ish. He murdered his wife in 2009. They only found her torso. He'd disposed of the rest of her, but for some reason had her torso in his trash can on the curb when the cops came. John was much, much nicer than his brother. Super dumb. The crazy, convoluted story he told absolutely sounds like something my ex would come up with. I can't prove it, but I know in my soul that John probably accidentally killed grievously injured Kristen during some fight, panicked, and called his brother instead of calling 911. And Mike told him what to do and what to say. John's dumber than a sack of hair and didn't wipe his ass without consulting his psycho but smarter brother. Mike is intelligent but batshit insane and evil as fuck. John stuck to the story and will die in prison. His brother changed his name and washed his hands of him. I don't know what really happened that night, but I know that the whole hacksaw, dismemberment, and wild OJ-type story sounds way more like my ex than something John would concoct on his own. I'm only shocked that my ex wasn't the one with a torso in his trash can. A local guy here in this very small rural community was watching Terminator 2 on TV and just snapped. He was angry that his sister was picking on him, got out a gun and killed his mother, sister, 2 brothers, and a brother-in-law. He then jumped in his car and fled and was arrested at a homeless shelter a state away a few days later. How did I find out about this? Next morning, I am out hunting in the woods, full camo with rifle in hand, walking down a creek bed. Suddenly, a helicopter passes overhead, then whips around and comes back. I hear a loudspeaker yell for me to stop and put the gun down. I drop the gun and hit the ground, and I'm freaking out. 15 minutes later, cops come storming down a path, guns drawn. I yelled, "Hey guys, what's going on?" They cleared my gun and checked my ID and saw I wasn't the guy. They told me that they were looking for a guy who just killed his whole family about 10 hours before. It took a few days for him to be spotted and arrested down at the homeless shelter. Our whole small community was pretty much locked down until he was found. The Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Chase. Paranoid, schizophrenic, necrophile, cannibal, spree killer in the 70s. Would only enter people's homes if they were unlocked, as that would be an invitation. Here's an excerpt from the wiki. It's extremely graphic, but still leaves out the worst of what he did. Chase broke into a house and shot Teresa Wallin, 3 months pregnant at the time, 3 times. He then had sexual intercourse with her corpse while stabbing her with a butcher's knife. He then removed multiple organs, cut off one of her nipples, and drank her blood. He used a yogurt container to scoop blood from her chest cavity to drink it. He stuffed dog feces from Wallen's yard down her throat before leaving. 4 days later, he entered a 38-year-old woman's home, shot her friend in the head, then her 6-year-old son, and 22-month-old nephew. He drank their blood and violated their corpses. When a visitor knocked on the door, it startled him and he fled, taking the 22-month-old's body with him. The headless body wasn't found for months. Chase was finally tracked down and caught trying to flee his apartment. Searching his apartment, it was soaked in blood floor to ceiling. The kitchen, refrigerator, and all his dishes and silverware. There were human brains in a dish in the refrigerator. He was decided fit for trial, got the death penalty, but was able to cheek his antidepressants and committed suicide. A friend of mine drives 18-wheeler tanker trucks, and he was on some highway in Ohio or Illinois or somewhere in the winter that was infamous for icing over. He was northbound, and one of the cars from the southbound side lost control on the ice and went across the median and right in front of him. He had no chance to get out of the way or slow down. It was a woman driving, and her 18-month-old daughter in the back. The impact killed them both instantly. The worst part is that the father was in another car following them and had to watch his wife and daughter die without being able to do anything about it. My friend had to go to therapy for a while after that, and I'm still not sure he's ever gotten past it. Worked at a pizza place in a small town, had this lady come in every Friday and get 2 pizzas for her family. 2 kids. One Friday, she comes in like normal, seems normal, chit-chat is normal, grabs the pizzas, and heads out. Less than an hour later, she stabbed her 2 kids and husband to death, decapitated them, and when the police arrived, tried to decapitate herself. In jail, she somehow was able to get something sharp and stabbed herself several times, but still survived. Not sure what came of the trial and whatnot after as I had moved, but yeah, it was wild. Super nice lady I saw every week, just snapped, I guess. When I was in middle school, my parents often worked out of town for months at a time, and my sister would have fairly regular parties and hung out with all of the delinquent kids pretty much. One time she had a party and there was a bunch of people in and out of the house. I met this kid, Jason Fisher, and he seemed nice enough, but he was a little sketchy as many of her friends, whereas a lot of them were involved in the drug scene around town. Not long after this party, we learned that Fisher had killed another kid and cut him up and had him in the trunk of the car. The timeline was a little unclear to me, but I was under the impression that the decapitated body was in the car at my house the day before it was impounded. The really messed up thing is that the body wasn't discovered till way later when the car in the impound lot started to stink. Fisher wasn't arrested till after that happened. When I was 13-14, I got into play-by-post role-playing. It was on the forum section of the official Harry Potter website LMAO. Not that we would RP as students or anything. It was all made-up characters and took place in a bar. The leader of the group was a very talented writer. We got to talking OOC and eventually linked up on MSN Messenger. He was the first internet friend I made. We found out we both were from Minnesota and not too far from each other, but never met in person. I got to know him very well over 2-some years. He was a year older than me, but was an extremely talented guy. Very well-spoken, well-read on topics I wasn't even thinking about at that age, and made very impressive flash animations. Stick death was big around then, so it was stuff like that. He lived with his grandmother, 'cause his mom was a drunk and his dad was dead. He talked about being bullied at school, his shit home life, etc. I remember once he said he told his grandma that he wanted to kill himself and that her only response was to do it outside so he doesn't make a mess of the house. We talked a lot and got to know each other really well over our friendship. He'd disappear occasionally a week or 2 at a time 'cause of his depression, but would always pop back up. Until he didn't. Breaking news was all over the TV one afternoon. There was a school shooting in the town he lived in. I immediately knew who the shooter was, well before the news announced it. He killed his grandpa and his grandpa's girlfriend, fellow students, teachers, and then himself. The FBI came to my house the weeks following and questioned me, but I didn't know his plans to do that. They took my computer to examine our interactions. I grieved him privately, but he's forever going to be a school shooter. That's the scariest thing I've ever been involved in. I was living in a high-rise on the 15th floor. Got home from morning yoga just as the sun had risen, and there's an ambulance and fire truck in the drive, but no lights or sirens. I get into the lobby to take the elevator up to my floor, and I overhear a cop on his cell phone saying, "Nobody knows where he fell or jumped from." Okay. So being the morbid creature I am, LL, I immediately go up to my place and out onto the balcony. I'm scanning the pool deck and don't see anything until I look directly down and see a man that's clearly been dead for a few hours just staring back up at me. Not as much blood as you would suspect. A few weeks later, I ran into one of the building employees and asked if he knew what had happened. He showed me the security footage of the guy falling to his death. I guess he was living a few floors directly below me, same floor plan by balcony. He had gone out drinking with some buddies to celebrate a recent promotion. Footage showed his friends leaving his place around 2:00. Around 2:20, he went out onto his balcony and, for some unknown reason, stood on a table which kicked out from under him, and he fell backwards over the railing about 6 stories onto the pool deck. He was spotted by a couple a few floors below him when they went out onto their balcony to have coffee and watch the sunrise. Poor guy died on impact and laid out there for like 4 hours. Drop a like and subscribe if you liked this video. Check out my other content too.